Welcome everyone to Howard Teich Presents, and we're exploring reimagining human dignity for today's world. An important topic, and I couldn't be more thrilled than to have Reverend Jacques DeGraff. Someone can't say one thing about him, but what you can say is he's probably one of the most respected people that I know, involved in so many different groups, welcome everywhere, and particularly thought of in terms of, I hate to use the word Jacques because it sounds like old, but the wisdom that you bring to the conversations. And so I'm thrilled you're here this morning.
Thank you, Howard. And your record of activism spans so many issues, categories, and genres, if you will, that it's a privilege and a pleasure to be here.
Well, that's great. Let's start just out of an overview of what human dignity means to you. How does it fit in with the word integrity? What difference does it make in today's world that these kind of principles are held by people and their behavior?
Well, when we talk about human dignity, I can't separate that from faith or the faith perspective, and all the great faiths recognize that the Creator's creation is special in and of itself, endowed, not based on geography, not based on material wealth, but based on its intrinsic value unto itself. And along with those values, there are traditions and there are values that come with each individual and with each society, and that they need to be respected, they need to be promulgated, and that we live in an age right now, Howard, as you and I have discussed on so many occasions, when the value and worth of man writ large, that is under challenge and is being ignored, oppressed, and depressed in many places on the planet, and in too many places in America today.
And one of the things that we've talked about a lot, and you've been so involved in, is youth, and it really starts with youth. You've taken leadership in places like the Eagle Academy. It's one of the early charter schools that's grown, and the chancellor came out of that. And what values did you have in mind when you went about saying we need to form this thing for children?
Well, we looked around the landscape of New York and were dismayed to see that we were losing a lot of our young men. That I won't say the lure, but the seduction of the streets had corrupted their values and destroyed their potential, if you will. And so a group of men looked around and said, well, we can do that. And so we formed the Eagle Academy. I'm pleased to be the person who gave it its name, because immediately it strikes a chord in people that we can soar, that it ought to be about something bigger than reading, writing, and arithmetic. So when we talked about the values, yes, we talked about leadership, we talked about achievement academically, but for me, the essential ingredient, which is missing in too many places, is character. Not what are you going to be when but who are you going to be, and what kind of person are you going to be?
And I remember when I went up there years ago and took a look at it's somewhat of a discipline that was built into it. It was a way of being, a way of living. And the young people who were there had a specialness about them, not only in terms of the way they dressed, but the way they performed, their reaction to things. How did you instill that?
Well, one of the ingredients, if you will, was to bring the notion of hope to dark places. The Eagle Academies are each place in the toughest zip code in their borough. And the idea is that men will come and mentor young males and provide role models and inspiration, hope, open doors for them, but also be there for them. Howard, that urban gun violence is a particular threat in our community. And so safe spaces is a concept that's important. And the discipline to get to and from and be in safe spaces sometimes is missing in the homes. And so we try to step in and provide a safe space and character building.
And yet it was done in a very secular way. You're a reverend, but it wasn't brought into that. However, America was founded on Judeo-Christian values, although it's grown over the years with many new inputs. Yet today there's so much negativity in the air, and between people. I'm curious, how do we bring more spirituality back? How do we overcome that negativity? In the sense you've done something of that in school.
Well, the basis of that, Howard, is living your values. Rather than proselytize any particular faith, we talk about the values that we live and we try to model them, number one. And part of that is how do we engage in the world, in public policy, in matters of public issues of the day. How do you conduct yourself? If someone disagrees with you, are they the enemy? Are they sons of Satan? No, they're people who disagree with you, but we can come together if we come in faith.
And one of the fascinations to me is the difference between human integrity is a value that we bring as human beings into things, different than having laws enacted that mandate things. In a sense, and one of the things we know is in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they bring dignity into it. People often say before you can talk about human rights, you got to talk about human dignity, because people have to have that understanding. How do we bring that into the thinking, even in terms of enacting laws, that legislators who often don't understand the context of human dignity, how do we bring that more into them? And you as a member of the clergy, work with people so our laws come out of values.
Well, Howard, I think you put your hand on it. One of the moments that we should look at as a country or learn from is to look at our recent past and look when people talk about the 60s. The civil rights movement and the peace movement in America were both aspirational. They were not just against laws or particular policies, but they were against a way of life that was, in view of all of us who were activists, they violated the fundamental worth of man, of humankind. And so we spoke in terms of aspiration of what America could be, and then challenged laws from that perspective. And so when we have the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, which you attended, the message was not just against this law or that law, but what kind of America do we want to be? Do we value what we would call in the faith community the least of these? Does everyone have a shot? Does everyone recognize wherever they are and however they are? And when we embrace that again, and we need to speak it loud, and Howard, there's an expression that used to describe a group of people back in the day. They were called militants because it has morphed into radical, but militants were very adamant about of gaining equal rights, and so I think we need some militant humanists right about now to speak about the value, the dignity, the worth of man, and come from that perspective. It's not about a red state or a blue state. It's about the state of man. And if we can change the basis of that conversation and call on those who go to worship on their Sabbath, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, but when we come out, we can stand together and care for one another, then that's what we have to be about. The demonstration of our faith cannot be within the walls of our houses of worship. We've got to become engaged in a meaningful way.
I like that, militant humanist. I haven't heard that expression before, but it's something that I think we really do need to pay attention to. And the more we can talk about it, the better, particularly as we move into one of the sources of conversation today is artificial intelligence. And what's going to happen with that. A lot of that has to do with what the input is, not just the output comes from the input. And it's of concern because maybe we need to be militant humanists in terms of dealing with those who are dealing with artificial intelligence. The world that could come out of that could lack humanity. It'll incorporate humanity, but depending upon how it's programmed, it might be something within the clergy, within your groups. Do you discuss this a lot? Is this of concern? What do we do about it?
Well, you raise a very provocative question about the emergence of technology as a potentially threatening / dominant force in our lives. Right now, most of the clergy circles that I'm in the movement and in interfaith circles are consumed with social justice, the issues of the day. Not enough are looking forward, forward looking at these issues of that challenge our worth and dignity, which is the artificial intelligence. It can be a great tool for progress, but we have seen great tools perverted. So the splitting of the atom could have been a source of energy, but the people in Hiroshima would beg to differ. And so the question is, who's going to be at the table? Who's going to be setting the guidelines and inputting? Back in the day again, when we were dealing with desktops and the wave of technology that we have today with digital progress, the expression amongst programmers was garbage in, garbage out. And so today, the expression is, what are we putting in? Are we putting in our values, or is expediency on the throne? Is profit on the throne ahead of everything else? Those are the concerns that we have to have. And then, if you look at history, the desire, the impetus for certain groups to feel that they must be on top instead of alongside other groups is a real concern.
One of the things that was said by someone we certainly know, some may not, Will Rogers, who was many years ago was one of the great satirists and leading voices in America, said you really can't understand someone unless you walk behind them and look through their eyes. I found that over and over again in terms of my involvement with various groups, where you may be impassioned toward, but you haven't necessarily walked the walk. You've walked your walk, but you haven't seen it through their eyes as they're walking. How do we deal with that in a better way? Because we have a lot of separation between communities. As much as we have communication, we lack that personal walking together with people. How do we do better about that?
Howard, we live in an age where we have access to the greatest access in human history to information and history. We have at our fingertips libraries. We have at our fingertips access to great literature, cinema, the arts, but literally pushing a button. And yet we are as divided as we've been at any time in human history. And so I think one of the examples I would use is your life. You have chosen not just to support groups, but to your walk with the Native Americans is one example. But the notion that the values and aspirations of somebody else are equal to my own aspirations and for my own people, if you will. When the civil rights movement was at its apex, Martin Luther King pivoted to talk about the Vietnam War. He was excoriated at that time. But the same values that he was fighting for in Selma, Alabama, he wanted for people across the planet. He wanted them to be able to live in peace and harmony and not subject to U.S. aggression and other aggression. Well, that compassion, that borderless compassion is where we have to be in public dialogue, that we have to look at things not just from our point of view, because we, as it's been said on other occasions, are inextricably linked to one another. And so the question of whether we're going to have a migrant facility on my block can't just be viewed from the perspective of my property values. It has to be viewed in the perspective of we are a city together and we're linked together. What is going to happen to those people? They are not pawns in a political game that can just be moved around the chessboard of America. They are human beings. They've already suffered a great deal, as many of our ancestors suffered to get to where we are today. And there needs to be we need to listen to, because there are voices saying this, but we need to expand the conversation to include some of the traditional voices.
I mean, one of the things and the reasons that I'm doing this series is because there are people who have thoughts, and I know that we want to get results. That needs to be explored. A lot of times it's people sitting around as they form a dialogue, and it stays in the room. And yet we don't get it put into reality. The idea of bringing all of this out, I was saying to someone yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone they have a storehouse of historical documentation, one of the organizations. And I said, it would be so amazing if everybody had the historical perspective on things as they look forward. And I said, maybe someday there'll be a chip you can implant that'll just give you all the history in the world. And their answer was, I hope not, because they won't know what to do with it. And so it's the shaping of all of this. I remember Brian Stevenson, I heard, who you know, and was talking about the experience of people in prison and coming out into the world and what that meant. There's, again, a lack of understanding between people, whether it be here, whether it be in prisons, whether it be overseas, in terms of even the war we're now involved in with Ukraine and Russia, and world affairs, because they have a dynamic in terms of, as an example, the Ukraine of increased poverty and hunger in Africa. And so when you take a look from a point of view of human dignity, you really have to shape all of our policies in terms of how is it affecting someone else, and really caring about that and somehow bringing them to the table. That's complicated, and the question is again, what as I have you on here, where does religion fit into this? Where does clergy fit into this? Where does a world grounded on a past that really had a great meaning fit into a world that's quite different today? Or is it the same?
Well, faith is under siege right now, and we need to, in effect, double down and use all of the resources available to us to preach our message, but also to recognize and embrace the interfaith dynamic of what our collective impact could be. One of the places that I think you talked about outcomes, that we have to be concerned about outcomes. And as we wind down, I think of Florida, and where Florida has recognized, the leadership of Florida has said that they want to change the curriculum in schools because they want to really affect how generations down the road will think and the possibilities. And I think that that's where we have to become engaged in. To your point about young people, we have to get involved in a meaningful way in not only the school curriculum, but in what happens in education writ large. By that, I mean, we need to be involved in after-school programs and in weekend programs and what was once known as extracurricular activities with our young people. Whether we have children in a school or not, we need to be involved in the education of our young people to point towards the society that we want. In my view, the forces of darkness are attempting to hijack our schools and to rewrite history to some limited vision, some limited, dark, nearly demonic vision of the revision of the past and the vision of the future that excludes many of the principles and values that we hold dear to today. And that's a very dangerous path that we're on. And I think that the role for clergy and activists and like-minded people is to really get involved in this particular area first, as a first step.
And when I think of human dignity, I've always thought of respectfulness, of understanding each other and having respect for who they are, what they're facing, and how we can work to be positive and enforce their opportunity to have a best life. I think that's missing a lot, which is people don't realize or People come around one time, they have one life, and our job is really to give them the best of all possible lives. And if we come from that point of view, and that's why I've dealt with this topic, and so glad to have you on. As we come to a close, you and I could talk forever on this, but I've limited time. Is that kind of sense of one to another, overcoming crime because an individual says, gee, I don't want to take this away from someone else, would be my ideal in terms of what we deal, rather than having a law to lock them up. But that's an ideal world we haven't quite reached. So we'll fight for it and be these radical militant humanists, I suppose, that I come back to. That's a phrase that I'm going to pick up and use. Any closing words, Jacques?
Well, I'm still in the hope business, and I believe that over these in America over 200 plus years, that we have still been climbing to higher ground, and that together, with activists, with faith, with people of goodwill, that we can hew to the ideals of our original principles. And that's where I stand. That's the banner under which I hail, and I'm looking forward to continuing this fight alongside of soldiers like yourself.
And I would say to everybody who's watching, listening, learn more about Reverend DeGraff. You can go on Google, learn about him. His life has really been a model. His relationships with people have been extraordinary. And the things that he's gotten involved in have really made a difference. So I thank you for being with us today on this, and we'll talk soon.